You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, thanks for joining me while I'm actually on a break from the show. This is Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I'm Mighty Blue, or Steve Adams. This episode is coming out on March the 24th, and according to my spreadsheet, I'm due to be in Edinburgh, in Scotland today. My girlfriend Dana and I are on a tour of the UK, and in just over a week I shall be heading out to hike the West Highland Way and Hadrian's Wall Path, both of which are also in Scotland. So to that end, I've been furiously podcasting, front-loading about 20 or 30 episodes of all our live Hiking Radio Network shows so that service can continue unabated. My commentary and my show notes will be shorter, and I won't be individually thanking our donors because, of course, I'm away. Today, we have a true adventurer. When I first heard of J.R. Harris, I was intrigued. This guy doesn't check off long-distance hikes for the sake of a long-distance hike. He hikes because he enjoys it, because he's curious, and because he can. He's 78 years old, yet he is as sharp as a tack and a deep intelligence born of his curiosity. When I tell you that one of his hikes was tracking a caribou migration, you'll kind of get where he's coming from. You are going to get a big kick out of hearing from JR. Our class of 2022 member today was recorded on March the 3rd. If all has gone to plan, Dom Tamarro should just now be out on the trail and starting his through hike. He's a professor at Brown, which I guess is a pretty serious job, but at heart, especially about this hike, Dom is a big kid, exuberantly excited about his hike. Dom will be on after JR. So let's hear now from J. Robert Harris, or JR. So today's guest is one of our more, how can I say it, vintage guests. He's even older than me. He's an adventurer and a rather unusual hiker. This is J. Robert Harris, or JR. Hey, JR, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, how are you?
Well, you don't look the least bit offended by being referred to as vintage, so hopefully that's a good thing.
Listen, man, I'm older than dirt. Dirt was discovered like a week after I was born. So, I don't take it personally.
That's all good. And I say that you're an unusual hiker, JR, because your way of hiking isn't to check off another long-distance trail, is it? Tell us the sort of hiking that you identify with.
Well, one way of describing it is that I hike to get to something that I want to see or something that I want to experience. So it's not about the hike itself. It's not about even the destination. It's not about trying to finish the hike. I go out into the wilderness, for example, because I want to walk on a glacier, or I want to see caribou migration, or I want to visit indigenous people, something like that. And so typically I walk there. So you could say that backpacking is like a means to an end. It's a way to get there and back.
And you walk there out of choice, because you could fly to some of these places and so on. You walk there out of choice, obviously. And you're not the typical hiker, as I say, in many ways. You grew up in the late 50s, early 60s in New York City. And the opportunities for a young black man in the outdoor space was fairly limited, I'd imagine then. How did your parents get you out of that environment and into the outdoors?
Well, growing up in the city, especially in the 50s, and growing up like I did in city housing, from a working class neighborhood, working class family, it got kind of sketchy during the summer in New York
City. Sketchy, great word.
For a kid my age. Yeah. And although I wasn't a troublemaker, I was a good kid, but my parents were obviously concerned. And so to get me away from the city during the summer, they signed me up in the Boy Scouts and sent me off to the Catskill Mountains to summer camp, where they knew that I would be under the supervision of responsible adults and not hanging out with my peers.
Sure. And I imagine that must have been a bit of a shock to your senses. What were your first thoughts when you got off the bus in the Catskills? It could not have been an easy transition, I suspect.
Uh, I like your shocked, to system description, because that's really what it was. I'd never been in the mountains before. I'd spent my whole life in the city, especially a big city like New York. And getting off the bus to me at that age was like I would imagine an astronaut getting off a rocket ship on Mars or Jupiter or the moon, something like that. Every single thing about it was new to me. Everything was unknown. It was a first experience. And keep in mind, I didn't want to go there in the first place because I wanted to stay in the city with my friends.
Oh, that's it.
So
I didn't get
culture
that.
shock.
Okay, in my notes the other day, I didn't get that. So you literally kind of went there kicking and screaming, did you? Or did you? Did they talk to you about what it was likely to be like, or did they?
They
just...
had no idea what it was like.
Oh, right.
Nobody in my family had ever done it. Nobody, nothing. All they knew was that it's the Boy Scouts. There are leaders there. There are adults there. They're doing constructive things, and it's taken me away from the city streets. But they had no clue. And so, I think that if they were on the bus with me, they would have been just as surprised as I was when I got off the bus.
That's right. So what did your contemporaries think of this? You being taken out and put into the woods.
Well, that was another problem. Growing up, guys my age, where I grew up, you didn't want to be a Boy Scout. I mean, a Boy Scout was considered kind of nerdy, helping old ladies cross the street,
sure.
And all that. And if you wear a uniform, they're like, oh, look at this guy.
Oh, really?
And so, they, maybe a good thing was that I was away for the summer, so I wouldn't have to take the grief that I've gotten if they saw me in my scout uniform while I was at home.
I'm sure that must have been, wouldn't have been fun, would it? No. And so, what was the impact on you of being in the outdoors? Was it immediate, or this kicking and screaming to get there? Once you got there, did you embrace the outdoors?
Yes, and I have to say, I was prepared to not like it.
You sounded like you were determined not to like it.
I was I was scheming for a way to get back to the city. I hadn't even gotten there yet.
Yeah.
But being a curious guy, even as a kid, and now being in a different environment, it didn't take me long to begin to say, well, at least give it a shot. See what it's like up here. And as the first days went by, my attitude quickly changed. I have to say that I got used to seeing trees, and sleeping, in bunks and taking walks in the woods and building fires and and all that stuff. And so my reluctance turned to curiosity, and then from curiosity it went to this may not be that bad.
I mean, you're obviously a naturally curious guy, and one of the things when we were speaking the other day, I take notes when I'm speaking to people, and you mentioned the expression. You said you could see from horizon to horizon. That's an interesting concept, isn't it? You never, people don't normally think of that, do they? Especially when they're in a city. That must have been quite a shock to you.
It was a lot of sky. It was a lot of sky, I mean, I never really thought, I never gave much thought to seeing from horizon to horizon before. But then when I got out there, I can remember perfectly, I was on top of like a little hill, right there in the campsite, and It was clearing, there were no trees. And I was like, wow, I can see all the way from one end to the other and all the way to the horizon. And that was quite an experience. I still remember that all these years later.
I'm sure it was. And of course, being in the Scouts, they must have offered you a considerable outdoor education as well, didn't they? What were they teaching back then? Or do they still teach the same thing now? I don't really know what the Scouts do now. So
I don't really know what they do now either, but I assume that it must be more of what they were teaching way back then, namely outdoor skills for young guys coming up. For example, we learn how to to make a fire in the pouring down rain, which I thought was fantastic.
Yes.
We learned to read a topo map. We learned to recognize animal tracks on the ground, and we learned which plants were edible. We learned how to make different knots and tie different things, and all that. And we learned how to cook over an open fire. We learned how to set up a tent. All these things, I had never ever done before. Never knew anybody that ever did it before.
It must have given you a great sense. It must have given you a great sense of accomplishment, though. Did it do something for your self-confidence as well as a young man?
It absolutely did something for my self-confidence. Even though, to be honest, I didn't really realize it till I got back home. When I got back home at the end of the summer, I was a different kid. I was a totally different kid. I felt more confident. I had more experience than the guys that I hung out with because of that summer. And so I started to feel a little separation, actually, from my friends in terms of what I had been through in the summer. And it was, I can remember coming home because my folks were like, how was it? They didn't even know what to expect.
Talk about gambling on what your son's going to do for the summer, especially if you don't know yourself. That was quite funny. And you sent me some articles about you. And while I'm not looking to rehash some of that story here, I was particularly interested in something that you wrote about in one of the articles. You wrote, I began to sense the natural world at a certain rhythm and pace. I feel precisely the same. How did that manifest itself to you?
Well, up until that moment, everything was faster. It was a city. I was on a city speed, kind of existence, and so when I got up there, and then everything was, take it easy, slow it down, stay in the present tense. There's a different rhythm, there's a different cadence. There's a different, nature was a little slower and more deliberate than the city, which I came to realize was this artificial rush. Everything in New York was, like a New York minute, as I say.
Oh, yeah.
But I was used to that.
Right.
That to me was normal. And so actually adjusting to this kind of cadence or this time difference was critical to my actually beginning to enjoy being out there, just staying in the present tense, and not that always rushing and which I wasn't even really aware of. So,
well, that may have, and this is only occurring to me now. You said you felt slightly distant from your friends. They weren't the same, but what about your family? Because if your family hadn't experienced that, there must have been some sort of separation there as well, wasn't there?
Well, yeah, there was separation. I understand that my family, when I came home, they were happy to see me coming home. I wasn't, I hadn't gotten in any trouble. There were no incidents that, some of my friends during the summer while I was gone, things happen in the city, and those things didn't happen to me. So my folks were very curious about the experiences I was having, but they were delighted that I liked it.
Yeah, I bet.
They really were happy that I liked it. I have to say that they put out a lot of money for me to go to camp.
I'm sure they did.
And for our family, that that was a sacrifice that they had to make. Thinking that well, at least he's out of the city. But when I came back home, they realized it was even greater benefit than just getting me away. That it was they could see that I was different.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned earlier, you weren't hiking for the sake of the hike, which is really interesting thought to me. You were an adventurer. You really feel like you're an adventurer. You are an adventurer. How were you able to fund all the trips abroad that you did? Because I think I read somewhere you've done over 50 of the trips abroad, which is not the cheap thing to do, is it?
No, it's not. But I had my own business when I finished college. I I started a consulting firm here in New York City, which is still happening. I'm still in business, so all these years
Oh,
later,
wow. Wow.
from
That's impressive.
1975. My company, JRH Marketing Services, is now the oldest and most experienced African American owned research and consulting firm in the country.
Wow.
And I had clients who were overseas. In fact, before I started my business I was working in the late 60s, early 70s uh, for PepsiCo in the international division. And so I was traveling around the world even before I started out on my own. So having my own business and doing extensive travel both in the States and abroad, I quickly accumulated thousands and thousands of frequent flyer
Oh,
miles.
cool. Frequent flyers
And
miles.
as a matter of fact, I made a decision to go overseas into the wilderness rather than use those miles domestically, thinking that, well, as long as I have free miles and I can get these tickets, I may as well go overseas. Because later on, after I've finished roaming around the world, I can always come back here and hop a flight to the Rocky Mountains
Yes,
or do the
yeah.
Appalachians or whatever.
Well, funny enough, but your first big adventure was straight out of college, wasn't it? You went to Alaska, which was a bit of a mystery. So tell us about that and why you went there.
So let's go back to 1966.
I was 14. I was 14
roaming around New York City.
Yeah.
I was a 20-something college grad, first in my family to have a college degree, and I felt the need to get away. It was, I had to work. I worked nights, going to school days. It was tough.
Yeah.
And so I decided just get away for a while, and get away from me meant a road trip, because that would be the cheapest way to do it. And I had a beat up secondhand Volkswagen Beetle.
Right.
And so then it was a way to go. So I looked at a map and I decided to go north. And it occurred to me that the farthest north you could go in the whole Western Hemisphere back in 1966 was about 110 miles north of Fairbanks, Alaska. You could not drive any farther north than that. So I said to myself, if I can drive to the very end of the road, and every single vehicle, every car, truck, bus, motorcycle in Canada, US, Mexico, every single one in the Western Hemisphere would be behind me. And mine would be the northernmost vehicle on the continent, and between me and the North Pole, there would be no other car, no nothing. So for that reason, I decided to just go there. I didn't even plan it. It sounded like such a cool idea.
It does sound a cool idea.
I just said, all right, let's go. I had never been out of the country before. I'd never driven that far before. I knew nobody there. I didn't know anybody who had ever been there. And Alaska had only been a state for like 10 minutes. I mean, Alaska became a state in 59. I went in 66.
Yeah.
Oil hadn't been discovered. There were like only 13 people living in Alaska. Well, maybe a few more. But it was a lot different back then.
So what did you do?
Really exciting.
What did you do? Once you got to be the northernmost person on the continent, what did you do? Turn around and came back?
I turned around and came back. I mean, the adventure on that trip was during the trip.
Right.
All the things that I saw, I drove from New York straight up to Canada. I made a left turn and drove across Canada all the way to the west. Then I made a right turn and started heading north. And I just kept going. I had no money to speak of. I had no real place to stay. I was sleeping in my car. I was driving 7-8 hours a day. But I would stop in a little town, to get a cup of coffee. And people were saying, what are you doing here, man? You got New York plates on your beat up car. And I'd say, I'm going to Alaska. And they go, Alaska? Nobody goes there. What are you doing? So I said, well, it seemed like a good idea, so I'm going to give it a shot. And I had a lot of adventure there. I ran out of money, so I had to do a little work in exchange for
when you're a
putting
kid,
gas in my
when
car.
you're a youngster, it doesn't matter, does it? Who
PCK.
cares? Who cares? Yeah.
But here's the thing. I just to mention two quick things. Number one, it was my first long solo trip, and that's when I realized that going by myself was a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
And the second thing was that it was on that trip that, I remember when I was in the Yukon Territory, pulling off to the side of the road and looking off in the distance, a beautiful, gorgeous mountain range, and wondering what is back there? What's beyond those mountains? What lakes are back there? What forests? What wildlife? I was confined to the road because I was driving. And I said to myself, this road trip thing is nice, but really what I like to do is be a backpacker and get back there and see what's really back there. So that was the other impact that trip had on me. It was being solo, and that was the start of my desire to be a long distance or adventure backpacker, if you want to call it.
That's quite a thought. And one of the backpacks you did was actually also up north in the Northwest Territories of Canada, and it was following the route of an abandoned pipeline. Tell us about the context for that, because that's fascinating. Why you did that?
That was incredible. So that goes back to 1941, Pearl Harbor, beginning of World War II.
Yep.
For the U.S. After the Japanese invasion. And the War Department or the U.S. Army, U.S. government was concerned that the Japanese Army would attack the states through Alaska and coming down the West Coast and into the lower 48.
Yeah.
And so they decided to, if there's going to be a confrontation, it should be up in Alaska. And so they quickly built the Alaska Highway, and they started shipping planes and equipment up to Alaska, but they had no oil.
Right.
Where was the nearest oil? It was in Canada on the Mackenzie River,
right,
about 1,000 miles away. And so they decided, the U.S. Army, with the cooperation of the Canadian government, decided to build a pipeline from the Mackenzie River across the Mackenzie Mountains and down into Alaska to Whitehorse in the Yukon, where they refined it. And so they built this enormous, long pipeline, and they had no idea how to build it on permafrost. And it was just a big rush job. And to get enough laborers up there to build the pipeline, they sent a Army unit of Black American, they call it engineers battalion, but essentially they were just laborers.
Sure. And
these guys who had never been out of the States before, had never been anywhere, they didn't even tell them where they were going. And they sent them up to help build this pipeline and to move all the supplies up there that needed to be there, the hundreds of thousands of tons of supplies. It's called the Canol Pipeline, CANOL for Canadian Oil. And at that time, it was the largest construction project in the entire 20th century. It was bigger than the Hoover Dam. It was bigger than the Panama Canal. Wow. And nobody ever heard of it.
No, I never heard of it at all.
Well, here's the reason why. By the time they finished building that pipeline, the threat from the Japanese military had vanished because of the Battle of Midway, which the Japanese lost. There was no way they were going to attack us. And so because this project, which incidentally cost $300 million in 1940s money, with 50,000 people working on it for a couple of years, they just pretended it never happened. They said, let's close it down and move right on. But now when I found out, especially when I found out that there had been a bunch of African-American troops in the segregated army working up there for a couple of years, I wanted to see what it was like. I mean, I wanted to see what it was like anyway, because I knew it was in the wilderness.
Yes.
But I knew that you could trace the now abandoned, long abandoned pipeline the route there, and very few people ever do it. When I did it, I did it alone. It was 233 miles. It took me 22 days.
Wow.
And during that time, I didn't see one single other hiker in the entire trip.
Do you like that? Do you like that? Do you like the 22? That's a long time to be talking to yourself, isn't it?
Well, when you think about it, people say, well, I'm going alone. But when you go alone, usually you'll see other people. You may be traveling alone.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you're doing something so different to what I'm used to. The AT, you see somebody every 5 minutes if you want to,
right.
or you don't want to. So being so far off the grid yourself, and I've wondered about this when I was reading about you today, how do you manage the risk? What do you do? Because, you're not a young man anymore. You could fall over and you could be gone. Right. So how do you manage that risk?
And not only that, but back then there was no GPS, there was no way of contacting anybody.
Sure.
I went out there and I knew that from the time I started, time I finished, I was on my own. I was totally on my own. And, but I was confident, at that stage. I'd done a lot of planning, I studied the maps. I was very fit, and to me, it was an adventure. I wasn't worried about anything happening. I realized that even if I was with somebody, if one of us got in trouble, we'd still be in the same bad shape as if you're out there by yourself.
Yeah, but at least your buddy could go somewhere, couldn't they, to try to get help?
Well, and I knew I wouldn't find anybody who was willing to do a trip like that. I mean,
I'm sure.
Among other things, it's an expensive trip. I had to charter a plane.
Wow.
To fly me in, and bring in my food resupply. But yeah, I actually, and that's an example of the kind of backpacking I do. It's not just a trip, it's to experience something or to see something out there.
Yeah, and when I was looking at your Facebook earlier on, you got some great little posts, and you got I think it's something or other Throwback Thursdays, and you talk about being caught in the Traveller Range in Tasmania back in 1998 in 2 days of wicked snow and wind. And you say to people on your post, you say, what would you do with 2 days in your tent? So I'm asking you, what did you do for 2 days in your tent?
Well, now, over my vast number of years of backpacking, I've actually been caught in the snow or bad weather and been tent bound a number of times.
I'm sure.
And one thing that I'm really good at is sleeping. And so if I wake up,
it's a great skill.
The tent,
it's a great skill.
When I look outside and it's one of those days where, buddy, you're not going anywhere today, I can just kick back, zip that sleeping bag back up and knock out some hours. And then when I'm not sleeping, I actually would get out and walk around. Like when I took the photos, I took a bunch of photos out in the snow.
Sure.
I seem to be able to amuse myself, Well, maybe I'm not that amusing, so I'm just trying to get past the time. But I can say honestly, I never get homesick, and I never on that trip or any other trip wish that there was somebody here to talk to because there's just nothing to do. Yeah. I was on my own, and it was fine with me. And I must just add very quickly, and there are some trips, not that many, where I've gone with a couple of friends, and they've always been great. Those trips have always been fabulous. But going alone, where you don't have to compromise with anybody,
it changes the dynamic, doesn't it? It definitely changes. You do have to compromise. You're not doing your hike anymore. You're sharing it with somebody else, which isn't the same thing at all, is it?
It's not exactly the same.
Yeah. Now, and you also told me when we spoke before that you, and I quote, just show up. Who did you show up to, and how did they view this bloke coming in, having hiked miles to get there?
So, I've always been interested in indigenous people and people who are living off the grid and what their life is like. And probably because the experience I had the first time I went to scout camp and was, the Catskill Mountains to me was off the grid. And so I decide, well, if you want to know how the Eskimo or Inuit people live, why don't you just go there? Figure out where they are and just figure a way to get there. And so that's what I do. I study before I leave, their history, tradition, and culture, religion, what they eat for breakfast. But I need to go and see for myself what it's like to live like they live. So I work it out, and then I just go there and I just show up. I don't know anybody. I have no letter of introduction. And when people see me the first time, the reaction's always the same. It's like, who are you? What are you? It's like, first of all, where's the rest of your, where's the rest of your party?
Your support team, yeah.
Yeah, and I said, no, I'm alone. You're here by yourself. Well, where are you coming from? So I said, New York City. New York City? You're coming all the way to New York City by yourself? And why are you here? What are you doing here? And I said, well, listen, I'm curious about your lifestyle, your culture, your history. I actually know a bit about it already, but I wanted to come. That's
a smart thing to do, to make sure you don't go in entirely cold as well. So when you meet these people, you obviously find a benefit in meeting them in their own platform, I guess, in their own terms. What have you learned about human beings in different parts of the world in all the times you've been traveling?
Well, a couple of things. I think primarily, though, that people from all over the world, there's more similarity in people than you would think. Yeah. When I was up in with the Inuit people in Alaska or in Greenland, or the Inca descendants in Peru, or the Aborigines, I walked 18 days across the outback. The lifestyle is different, yes, but underneath it, there's a lot of similarity. For example, everybody wants to live a peaceful life. They want to raise their kids to be better than they are.
Sure.
They want to enjoy their family. They want to get along in nature. And it's interesting to see how that evolves, how that comes out when you're spending time with people and you getting to sit down with them and just talk. And I have no real agenda. I'm not coming from any university or any museum. I'm not part of an expedition. I'm not picking into their background. I'm just a guy.
Sure.
And I show up and I say, listen, I'm here just to learn, and I'm not going to be a burden. I have my own tent. I've got my own food. I've got everything I need. And if you happen to need any help getting anything done, and everybody has more work that they need to get done up there than people, I said, I'll help you out. All I like to sit down with, the older folks, listen to your tradition, listen to your stories, and ask questions based on the homework that I've done before I got here, to come away with a better picture of how other people live.
Wow.
And another thing I always find out is that they are equally curious about me and my lifestyle.
I bet they are. Who's this crazy old dude?
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's about it. What's this guy?
So in 2022, 60 years, more than 60 years after you went to the Catskills, I'm sure the outdoors seems a little more diverse than it was when you were starting out. Yet it's probably true to say that diversity isn't reflective of America as a whole. Do you see good things that are starting to happen?
I do. I would say right here now that in all the trips I've ever taken, I never had a really bad incident with people. Now, it's also fair to say that where I go, I don't see a lot of people, of any kind,
Yes.
so that's,
seeing people doesn't exactly count as a metric.
They're not going to get any negative reaction there.
Yeah, very true.
And, when I do see people, they're always, they say, man, I've been hiking for years and I've never seen another Black person out here. And then I say, yeah, I haven't either,
Yeah.
But now it's changing. You know, I can see it now. There are a lot of outdoor organizations that cater to minorities, and people are people who had never thought of it. You know, people like me back in the day who never thought or dreamed about going out hiking or into the mountains. They're starting to go, yeah, you know, that it's healthy. It's, you know, it's a good thing to do. It's something different, something I'd like to try. And so I am gratified to see more people of color in the outdoors. And to be honest, it's not a moment too soon, because we need as many people to get out there as possible in order to save the environment and to keep it protected from developers who want to come in and maybe chop down the trees or mining or cattle raising, whatever, at the expense of taking public lands away. So the more people that go out there, the more people who will appreciate it. I believe in order to protect it, you have to appreciate it. And in order to appreciate the wild, you have to experience it.
You have to be there.
And so, yeah, I'm happy that people are going out there. And I'm also happy that they seem to like it. The reports that I read and what I see on social media, people are experiencing it and liking it just as I did when I was a kid and going out. And a lot of them didn't know what to expect. I've been there, it happened to me. But once they get out there and they're going, wow, you know, this is not so bad at all.
Well, you know, you've had an amazing life. I mean, I've only just touched the surface. I mean, you even mentioned it earlier on, you followed a caribou migration. Oh my gosh. I mean, things like that are just remarkable. And like all good adventurers do, you've written a book about it. It's called Way Out There, Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker. Listen, he's holding the book up now, but we're not having this in video, but that's okay. It's all good to know.
I'm holding a book up.
So I haven't had the opportunity to read it yet, but I've read quite a bit about you today. What are you trying to tell your readers with that book? You're just telling your story, or is there something deeper within that book that you want to get across to people?
No, there is nothing really deeper. It's a story of a guy throughout his life who was born curious and also restless. A guy who loves adventure at the same time he loves learning about things, people, and the natural worlds.
Sure.
And a guy who's had a lot of stories to tell. I've been all over the world doing this for a very long time, and I'm essentially a storyteller, and that's really what I want to do. And I tell you, the smartest thing I ever did was to keep a detailed journal of every trip.
I totally agree. You should do, yes.
Absolutely. You know, but when I did it, you know, I started doing it thinking that when I got to be an old man, like 50 years old, and
28 years ago,
in my
you mean?
rocking chair, you know, I could take out one of these journals and bring back all these exciting experiences. And little did I know that when I got to be 50, I was still going out there, you know, and then when I got to be 60, I was still going out there. And then when I got to be 70, still going out there and still writing journals. But I do read some of those journals, and it really brings back not only the incidents.
It takes you back. For me, I podcasted and I journaled. It takes you back there. And I even, if I haven't written about it, I remember the day. And I sometimes remember something else that happened on that day, even though I hadn't written about it.
That's right. And not only that, but it gives me a picture of who I was 20 years ago or 30 years ago when I read a journal.
Sure.
You know, back in the old days, for example, the journal sounded a lot more macho. You know, I'm in grizzly country now. You know, you could get killed out here. You know, and now I read it, I'm like, what? Come on, you know, that's not me anymore. So yeah, you know, it gives you a spotlight, you know, that shines on the kind of person you were and how being in the wilderness impacted me.
Yes.
You know, and so it's more than just reading the incidents.
Yeah.
It's realizing who I was and where I was in my development as not only a man, but as a backpacker and a guy who loves to be out in the wilderness.
Sure.
And traveling alone.
And you're 78 years old now. Is that right? 78?
Well,
You look
I'm
remarkably well.
77 now. I'll be 78 in about 3 weeks.
That's good enough. You're all right.
So
You're nearly,
we call it 78.
You're
Let's
nearly
call it 78.
Yeah, you're
End of
looking
March.
Are you looking great? Any signs of slowing down, or are you just or do you start to feel it a little bit now, or you just keep going out?
No, because I love doing what I do, that is the motivation I always had to stay in shape.
Sure.
And I know maybe better than most people because I've taken so many solo trips and realize what happens if you're not fit, and you have to really depend on yourself and your stamina.
Yeah.
And so the other thing is that if you're not fit, you're not going to have fun. And if you're not going to have fun, what's the point of going?
Yeah, totally.
So I stay fit. I feel great. I just came back not just came back, but the end of last summer, I spent 3 weeks alone down in the Shenandoah National Park and the Great Smoky Mountains, nice. Just backpacking down there. And I feel great. I don't put in the same daily mileage that I used to, but it's really not so much that I'm that old. It's more like now I have more time and I can appreciate where I am and I can take it a little bit slower. Now, if the weather turns bad or something happens and I need to kick it up, I can put in, I can drop 20 miles, 25 miles a day if I have to. But I don't really have to most of the time. And so rather than back in the day, I have to get home, I got to go back to work, I got this, that, and the other, I have all these commitments. Now, I can take it at a slower pace.
Well, Joe, nature has been great to you. You look amazing. People can't see you here, but you look remarkable. And I feel privileged to have had the chance to speak to you. And I really want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you. It's I've been following your podcast for a while now, cool. And I've always enjoyed it, and so it's really cool that I got a chance to be on it. So thank you for asking me.
If I'd known about you earlier, man, I would have had you on first episode. You're a remarkable guy. So thanks so much for coming on, and hopefully we'll talk again sometime.
Excellent. Anytime. Yes, you stay well.
Okay, and you. Bye.
Okay, Steve.
What did I tell you? What a man, eh? If he's not a role model to any kid, black, brown, white, pink, green, then I don't know who is. Imagine just turning up in the middle of an Inuit settlement and saying, "Hi, I'm from New York." And what about his hike along the Alaska pipeline? It's as if he's absorbing knowledge from his environment and actually living it in nature. I felt absolutely privileged to have had the chance to learn something from him. Awesome. Now, tough to follow, I know, but another very enthusiastic hiker, Dom Tamarro, checked in with me in early March as he continued his AT hike preparations. Here's Dom. This week I saw, I think it was on Facebook, a picture of today's class of 2022 guest, Dom Tamarro, dehydrating a lot of food. So first, hey Dom, how are you?
Good. How are you, Steve?
I'm good. And I also know you also sent me an email, Dom, just to give you a rough idea of how excited he is. Sent me an email the other day with a picture of a countdown clock.
Well, I got the idea from you. I had thought about it a while and forgot that those existed. And so right after you and I talked and you had asked if I had one of those, I went out and got one. And
terribly important.
It's been counting down.
Yeah. So now we're recording this on the 3rd of March because everybody knows I've got to front load all these episodes. And this episode is going out on the March 24th episode. And you've just told me, and I knew it was at the end of March you were going, that the day this goes out will be day 2 of your hike, won't it?
I'll be waking. It'll be my first day waking up on the trail if all goes well.
So it's a somewhat superfluous question to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are you getting excited?
I can't even describe it. It's it's excitement. There's also a little bit of trepidation, and
is that mounting, by the way, or is that something?
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
but I'll tell you, I resolve it by saying, well, I'm not going to know how it is. I can't really prepare any more than I've already prepared. I can't really devote any more of my brain to this until I get out there, and that's going to be my, I'll experience it. I'm looking forward to it, and I'll just now what's left is just to get out there and to dehydrate some food, right?
So tell us about that. I saw you had it was quite a busy kitchen at the time. So did you research it, or is it a straightforward thing to do? Is it something you've already done in the past?
Well, the dehydrating part, my wife and I have done. We've never packed meals like this. You can if you make a one pot meal, you could spread it out on a dehydrator, let it go overnight, and what you end up with is something the consistency of crackers that you could put in a bag and then rehydrate, and right. it really comes out great. And then if you get a little bit fancier and use some recipes that are really designed for that, the results are terrific. So we're going through this. I forget if you had her on, but the person I got a lot of the recipes from is Erin.
Erin Mayhew. Yes.
Yeah, from Backcountry Foodie.
We did, yeah. So you got her recipes, and what's the sort of stuff you're taking then?
Well, so there's some pasta dishes, and with some freeze dried ingredients. Those we didn't freeze dry ourselves. We bought from a commercial outfit, mail order, and there's she does this great thing where she'll say, okay, you take a brick of ramen noodles, which are ubiquitous or available. You open it up, you throw away the packet, and make up a flavor packet and spices and dehydrated cheeses and things like that, and mix that in. And I've tried a bunch of her recipes. There's one taco mac and cheese that's also really good, kind of a pad thai recipe. There's a lot of different options she has.
What about breakfast, though?
So breakfast is a combination of there's some dishes based on what I know to be your favorite food, yes. Oatmeal.
Not.
Some stuff with quinoa, some others with I want to say barley or buckwheat, I forget.
Right.
And I've tried not all of them. I've tried most of them, and they're really good. They're really easy, and for the calories you get for the weight, they're terrific. And they I'm taking a bear can, and they're economical in terms of the space that they take up, as well as their weight. So we're doing a little bit at a time. My wife has been extraordinarily patient. I'll say, let's watch something.
Let's do some dehydrated tonight.
Well, that's what she said. I'll say, let's watch something. She'll say, no, we have meals to dehydrate. Let's go. So
I recall this when I was packing my stuff up when I went on the AT in 2014, and we had all these packs of stuff all over the dining room table. So what are you doing? Are you going to get them labelled, or are they going to be mailed to certain places for mail drops? How are you working that out?
So I'm not doing the whole trail with these dehydrated meals. Probably about half the time, and when they run out, I'll go into town and resupply locally.
But Snickers and ramen, yeah.
That's it, right. Probably together. But
winning combination.
But I'll touch base with Kay, and I'll ask her. Well, I think in the next week or so I'll be at this place. Can you mail it? And I'll just we'll talk as I progress along the trail. And I there's a few places. I want to get the mail to places where I'm not going to be having to rush or to kind of finagle my schedule to get there in time for the post office to be open. So a hostel or a hotel or an outfitter, those sorts of places that will hold a package for a through hiker
that
are
makes
the places
sense.
I'm I'm focusing on.
Yeah, that makes sense, Dom, because you're right. Sometimes you're rushing on a Friday because or a Saturday, or because you don't want to be opening until Monday. So that's a terrible feeling. And you know what? There's something really almost wonderful about saying to the person who's sending you meals, saying, well, I'm about 60 miles away from, I don't know, Duncannon, whatever, send me something to get there in 4 days. So you got to do 12, 15 miles a day, 14, 15 miles a day. And that thought in your mind before you started this hike, you would never have imagined you could say to somebody, send something 60 miles ahead of me, I'll be there in 4 days. It's kind of
unless
weird.
I was driving.
Unless you're driving, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So the day you go, where are you spending the night before? I forgot to ask you that before.
So I fly into Atlanta. My cousin lives in Atlanta. He's going to pick me up, and
Nice.
I'll spend a day or so with him and his family, and then they're going to drive me to Amicalola. I'm going to spend the night at the lodge, and then they may. We're still figuring it out. He and his family may hike the approach trail with me.
Oh, right. So you're still determined to do the approach trail. You don't want to be dropped off at the back.
No, I think the approach trail, the pictures that I see of the falls are beautiful, and I want to experience that. I want to experience the whole thing.
Yeah, I quite agree, by the way. But as people will constantly tell you, it doesn't count. I always remember thinking, as I was going up the approach trail, thinking, "Oh, am I enjoying this? Is this hard? I don't want to be the person who quits with a minus number of miles. 3 miles from the top or something like that would have been a nightmare."
That's right. So compare that to I've heard on your show you described the scrubby little parking area and the road.
Scrubby little path up the Springer, yeah.
That doesn't make it sound attractive to me, so I'm going to do the approach trail.
It's very attractive going down it, though. That once you get started and you start moving, it is a kind of quite a very narrow path actually. But then very quickly, when you start, you touch the first blaze and you touch the sign at the top. You're going to stay in that shelter on just near the top. I never remember the name.
I think so. I'm going to take it slow and do single digits for the first couple of weeks.
Good.
And so the shelter that's right near the top, I'll because I'll probably get there at midnight because I'm such a slow hiker. So I probably won't have much time to go beyond that. But,
well, I'm
going to stay at that first shelter.
Well, all I would say, pay attention. Because I went about half a mile past it when I did my first hike. I banged my head at the top on an overhanging branch, and I missed the first shelter. So in the space of about 300 yards, I got lost, and I banged my head on a branch. So beware, it's possible.
You were ready to turn in for the night.
I was, yes, you're right. Well, look, we won't be speaking again in that case until I'm back from Scotland. I've got my hike in Scotland coming up. I get back on, I think, the 16th of April. So that week after, I'm going to call you guys in, and you'll be 3 weeks into your hike. Can you imagine that?
I can't even imagine. It's so
I'm excited.
great.
I'm excited for you, man. I tell you, I really am excited for you because you're one of the guys who really, really is living this. You're living your journey already, and you haven't even started it yet. I just hope the reality of those first 3 weeks are as good as you expect it to be, and I'm sure it will be. And when we speak, you'll be three weeks under your legs, and that's a good feeling.
Yeah, actually, it may just be 2 weeks because I'm based on when you're going to get back, I am going to get off trail for 3 or 4 days to actually go to a meeting. We have these meetings twice a year, and for 2 years, I haven't seen my friends and colleagues. And as luck would happens, the meeting this year is in Charlotte.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to get to, I'm anticipating getting to just south of the Smokies. Like Franklin, that area, Fontana. Yeah. And so I'm going to rent a car and go to the meeting, take a few showers before I meet any of my friends.
Plenty of showers, yeah. Or just turn up in your hiking gear. That'd be even better.
Well, I won't, Kay's going to mail me. Actually, she's planning on coming down to meet me cool. there. So cool. That'll be fun. So I'll have a maybe 3 or 4 days out, but I'll have been on the trail for 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm just, I'm going to be grateful for whatever it sends my way.
I'm sure, yeah, that's right. Let it unfold. Let it come to you. Don't try to take it on. It'll kick your ass every time otherwise. Okay, man, you take it easy and we'll speak when I get back, okay?
All right, have a superb trip. Enjoy it. Take lots of pictures.
I will, man. Take it easy.
All right, take care. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye. As I said, Dom should be out there now. I really hope he's having a blast. He looked forward to this so much. I hope he's just as enthusiastic the next time we speak. Next week, my guest is going to be Ken Good, or PTL, which stands for Praise the Lord. Have a great week.